Councillor Freeman and Councillor Gates. Okay, everyone. Welcome to Development Control Committee on Wednesday, 9th of August 2023. Just a few words for housekeeping and then we'll get started. Fire evacuation. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening, so if the fire alarm sounds, it's for real. Please evacuate the building by the nearest available exit. So you've got fire exit at the back of the public chamber and fire exits either side of where I'm sitting. Go down the stairs. We've got a muster point in the Moore Memorial Park where we'll meet. Hopefully we won't have to do that. Webcast of meetings. Please note this meeting is being broadcast live on the internet. Mobile phones. Please ensure your phones are either switched off or switched to silent. Development Control as Planning Committee is a regulatory committee. It's not a party political committee. The councillors who are seated to my right are effectively jurors operating in a quasi-judicial capacity. To my right is the Vice Chair of the committee, and then we've got legal advice on the right, just to make sure everything's all done above board. And to my left, we've got planning officers and democratic services officers who are going to provide the relevant expertise at the time we require it. So, without further ado, apologies for absence. Item 1, apologies for absence and substitutions. Councillor Phillimore.
I think I'm substituting for Mr. Councillor Godson.
Noted. And Councillor Freeman sends her apologies. Her mum's got COVID, so she's having to stay away. Okay. Item 2, any declarations of interest? Okay, there are none. Duly noted. Item 3, urgent matters. I don't think there are any. We've not been notified of any. Excellent. Item 4, minutes of the meeting held 12th of July. So to consider these for accuracy. Do I have a mover? Councillor Rattigan, seconder. Councillor Miller. We all agreed? Excellent. So I'll initial and sign those later on. Right, which brings us to the proper business. Item 5, applications for planning permission and public participation thereon. And the first one of the evening is Kennel Farm, Begwood Lane, Dummer. Officer presenting. If you'd like to lead on that.
Thank you, Chair. Item 1 seeks planning permission for the change of use of an existing stable building and associated land to provide one residential dwelling together with amenity garden, hard standing and parking. There is an extensive planning history at the site and the wider site at Kennel Farm, and this is listed on page 60 to 62 of the main agenda. The use of the stable building and associated land for private equestrian uses was secured in a previous was tied to a previous permission through legal agreement. This application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions listed from page 81 of the main agenda, and to a deed of variation to remove that restriction on the use of the stable building. An amended site location plan has been received, and this was to include land adjoining the site with the public highway. Following receipt of this plan and the associated ownership certificates, the application has been republicised, and the new consultation period expires on the 21st of August, and therefore the recommendation is also subject to the expiry of that consultation period, and no new material considerations being raised through that process. Turning to the update paper, we've got summary of the viewing panel that occurred on the 4th of August. We've also received some further consultation responses. The building control team have now commented on the application, and they advise that the building would appear to be suitable conversion with minimal repairs, And the Highways Authority have also confirmed that their previous comments apply, which are reported in the main agenda. A further representation has also been received from a neighbour who raises concerns over loss of privacy, and in their representation they have requested that a fence is erected along the southwestern boundary of their property, which is Barley House, or Barn 2, in accordance with the plans that are in the agenda. A summary of the issues that are raised there is set out in the update paper. However, since publication of the update, confirmation has now been received from the applicant that they would be agreeable to such a condition if the committee felt that it was necessary to impose. Members are also advised that the agent has agreed to the pre-commencement conditions listed in the recommendation. The condition 1 on page 81 does refer to the wrong application reference, and therefore it's also it's been amended and it's as set out on the update paper just to refer to the correct reference. In addition to the update paper, there is also a verbal update with further comments being received from Natural England and the Joint Waste Client Team. The Joint Waste Client Team have now confirmed that their refuse vehicles are able to access the property via the private access track, and therefore bins can be collected from the curtilage of the property and not Garlick Lane as reported in the agenda and also noted at site visit. And Natural England also advised that the amended site location plan does not alter their previous comments. The application is before the Development Control Committee this evening in line with the scheme delegation due to the number of objections that have been received, and it's recommended for approval. Okay.
Control Committee, when you start speaking, you'll have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. Obviously, we are in support of the officers' comments that have been made in the report. So I just want to highlight some additional points or provide some clarification. We are aware of some of the comments that the building would need to be demolished in order to deliver this new home. We do wish to confirm that the applicant is not seeking permission to demolish, and the application is for the conversion of the building, including the associated works to facilitate that conversion, and that was just clarified by the officer in the update sheet. The structure report which supports the application identifies that the brick walls are variously in very good to good condition, and I think everyone saw that on site. There will be localised need for repointing, but that is to be expected. The report also highlights that subject to some repair of the timber beams, the roof structure is also otherwise in a very good condition, and overall there is no obvious movement of the foundations or the roof structure. The conversion of this building will create a single-storey smaller dwelling, 1 bedroom with a office space as well, which does offer a more accessible form of accommodation and of a scale which is identified in the Council's housing market assessment as being required to meet a local need. The conversion of this disused building will also allow for the conservation of this locally listed building to be undertaken in a manner appropriate to its significance. We are also aware of some of the other third-party comments that have been submitted, and we just wish to add that the building conversion wouldn't result in additional urbanisation of the site. It will use existing building form and is located between other existing residential developments. The building is not isolated and can local leisure areas can be accessed by foot, and Basingstoke can also be accessed by bike as well. Overall, this application will make a very modest but meaningful contribution to the housing delivery for the area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the applicant? Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one question. When we came on the viewing panel, it's a lovely old building. Just to confirm one thing, that the ridge line, the roof, I think, is fairly spectacular. I think we all noted that. You will not be raising the ridge line of the roof. Well, it's a rhetorical question, but...
No, it's a very valid point, and no, we're not. We're keeping the building as is. There will be some localised repair. Obviously, the vents that you saw on site will need to be repaired, but we're keeping those and the ridge line overall. There was some slippage of some of the slate tiles, and also those would just be replaced or repaired depending on the need. So if they're broken, obviously they'll be repaired with like for like.
Thank you, Chair.
No more questions? Debate? Oh, questions to officers, sorry, yeah. Councillor Phillimer, yeah.
On first, Chair. Page 56, reasons for approval, number 2, which refers to the effect on river catchments that flow into the Solent, and the sentence that says the likely significant effect is to be mitigated to achieve a nitrate neutral development. How is that going to be achieved?
Thank you. It's a combination of on-site and off-site measures. So they are proposing to install a package treatment plant, which deals with some of the nutrient load from the development arising. And then the residual, the leftover, is being dealt with through the Eastleigh Borough Credit Scheme, which is being secured through condition, both the delivery of the package treatment plant and its maintenance in accordance with details that have been submitted as conditioned in the list of recommended conditions. And there is also a condition to secure confirmation that they actually do buy the credits that they've said that they'll buy, and therefore be able to mitigate those residual load as well.
Councillor Faulkner?
Thank you. Yeah, my observation is on page 59, the top part of that paper is quite a, shall we say, damning condemnation by the inspector of that site. Whereas on this application, we seem to be recommending approval in stark contrast to what the inspector stated. So I'm not quite sure which ones would I believe. And I'm also mindful of the fact that 8.5 years ago, one of my first involvements was where in St Marybourne an exact sort of situation like this was approved, and once it started, after £30,000 worth of construction, our building control team went along and condemned the foundations and had to stop. It had to be demolished and an application put in for a new build, which was refused, quite bizarrely. So I wouldn't want to get into that situation again, so I'm not quite sure how to weigh the officer's recommendation against what the inspector said some years ago.
Thank you. I think one thing to be mindful is that the policy context is significantly different now to when the appeal was before the inspector. So we've got the introduction of the National Planning Policy Framework. We've also got the adoption of the current local plan. On top of that, we also cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, which influences the context in which this application needs to be considered. Turning to the previous applications, the proposed conversion does differ in its detail. Notably, the previous application was for the conversion to 2 dwellings. This application is for 1. So the scopes of works for the conversion were different. So where the inspector had concerns that the previous applications wouldn't preserve the intrinsic features of the locally listed building, the conversion this time round is considered to be a lot more sympathetic in its detail. A lot of the features would be retained, and in particular, the existing open bays which you saw on site visit, they are supposed to, the proposed conversion would be enclosing them but with windows rather than solid walls as per the previous application. So the officers considered that it would be a much more sympathetic conversion which relates better to the historic interest of the site. In terms of the inspector's comments on how the building could be converted, we've obviously this time around been provided with updated structural information, and it has also been confirmed by our building control team that that conversion is likely to be able to be facilitated without extensive works occurring. So there have been changes in circumstances since the previous applications.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. On the update report, you've considered that close board fencing might be applicable for screening. I wonder if it could be a more natural screen, so something like, I don't know, even laurels, but something better than just a close boarded fence, because it will be very stark in the beginning, and I don't think aesthetically it looks particularly good. Have you any thoughts on that as one of your conditions?
Thank you. The existing boundary along that does comprise of a deciduous hedge. So the concerns raised by the applicant relate to certain times of the year when that foliage is not in full leaf. Turning to the point of a fence, it is likely that they'll be able to erect a fence under permitted development anyway. Okay.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. The question's already been answered. So,
Okay, Councillor Court, I see your hand up there.
Thank you, Chair. It's noted this building is locally listed. How is it intended to identify and maintain the aspects of its listing, local listing, during the conversion?
The conversion of the property itself, don't think would have any impact on the listing. I'm just wanting to confirm it, but that's my understanding.
No, the conversion itself wouldn't impact on the local listed status, and as Gemma has said, the alterations have been considered by officers and in particular the historic environment team to be a sensitive conversion, maintaining that historic character for which the building is locally listed, so it's not anticipated there will be any change in that local listing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Supplementary. How is that to be maintained during construction? Is it to be inspected?
No, the plans would be secured through condition 1 that development would be carried out in accordance with the approved plans. There wouldn't be any necessary inspection other than through the building control process. If there was a suggestion that development hadn't been carried out in accordance with the approved plans, we could obviously investigate that, but we wouldn't look to visit to monitor.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Any other questions? Debate. Okay. Councillor House-Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm fully in support of the recommendation. There was lots of questions there, but I think the fact of the matter is we've got a 5-year land supply issue. There are concerns maybe around the listing aspect, but I think it's a fairly sensitive conversion that we're looking at. It's a beautiful old building that will become a beautiful, slightly more modern building. And I'm perfectly happy with all aspects, including the conditions that have been put in the update paper. So for lack of any other debate, I'm happy to move a motion to support the officer's recommendation.
Seconder, Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, quite happy to second it because I think it's a very sympathetic improvement for the building. It also will preserve it a lot longer. If it's left on its own, it's just going to deteriorate. So I think this is a very good example of how we can keep these heritage buildings, for want of a better expression, in the borough for probably as long as everybody in this room is going to be around. But quite happy to second the officer's recommendation.
Excellent, thank you very much.
Sorry. Can I just seek a point of clarification for the motion? Does that include a condition to secure close-bordered fence or similar along that boundary?
Okay, so we have a motion seconded for approval with the addition of the condition for the fence. We shall now move to vote. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Okay, so if we could have the decision.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to confirm that that application is approved, subject to the conditions listed in the main agenda and update paper, the completion of legal agreement and the expiry of the publicity period with no new material planning considerations. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, that brings us on to item number 2, land at the barracks in Newnham. If I could have the officer introduce the item, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a permission in principle application for the erection of a minimum of 1 number and a maximum of 4 number residential dwellings. The recommendation is to approve. There is an update on page 5 of your update papers. The members viewed the site on the 4th of August. There is a summary of what was considered. The update since the viewing panel, there has been some more information provided by the applicant, but that is based on their working up of a possible TDC, and it goes beyond the considerations of a PIP. So we haven't publicised it and we haven't considered it within this evaluation of the PIP. It's for the next stage, the technical detailed consent. There is on indicative site plan there, but we have to say it is indicative because it's a PIP for a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 4, and it could come in any variation of flats or houses or big houses or small houses. That's just one indication of how it could be delivered.
Thank you very much. So do we have a representative from Newnham Parish Council? Councillor Gaskell. Welcome to DC. When you're ready, you'll have 4 minutes.
Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, officers, for your time in dealing with this application and for your attendance at the site visit on Friday. I speak tonight as Chairman of Newnham Parish Council, not as a ward councillor. The hamlet of the barracks is a conservation area and is separated from the main village of Newnham by a railway line. As such, it has continued as a secluded offshoot of the main village with mainly historic farm cottages, an area of common land and a carter's yard, accessed via an unmade track. It is also allegedly the barracks for the English Civil War. The barracks borders Nately Skures to the south. This area was until recently characterised by single houses in large plots with areas of open field in between, but subject to urbanising impact of the A30. It has changed incrementally, but over recent years substantially by infill and backland development. This semi-rural open countryside area is now residential. This application does not accord with the provisions of policy SS1, scale and distribution of new housing, or SS6, new housing in the countryside. In the past 10 years, the Newnham Parish has added at least 25 new dwellings to Basingstoke's windfall figures. This is over 10% of the parish's housing stock, and this does not include the additional homes at Waterend Park, where we have approximately 50 park homes. The villages within the parish have mainly grown by means of additional single dwellings built on larger plots or residential development on former brownfield sites. This site is its current state is greenfield. In terms of social pillars of sustainable development as discussed by the applicant, Newnham, despite being in the open countryside, has already boosted its housing supply significantly during this plan period. Newnham Parish Council has rarely objected to small-scale new housing developments. The Parish Council does, however, object to speculative development on agricultural land. This site is an agricultural field, until very recently used to graze sheep, corresponding in nature and land use to fields in the rest of the parish and contributing in a small part to the rural economy. This land use is part of the village's sense of place and rural identity. As per NPPF Chapter 11, Making Effective Use of Land, this site in question has an effective use as agricultural land in contributing to the function and identity of the settlement. Adding a further 4 houses alongside those built on the site Highview Business Park, which was a former carter's yard,
1 minute left.
will create a suburban style development of 8 dwellings, outkeeping with the area and dominantly urbanising with an urbanising influence. The prevailing character of the barracks remains rural. The Parish Council fundamentally disagrees with the applicant that this is a clearly built-up area. But speculative applications such as this, if approved, will make this a self-fulfilling prophecy. NPPF Chapter 11 notes the desirability of maintaining an area's prevailing character and setting. Local Planning Policy SS6 notes the aims of the local plan to resist the encroachment of development into rural areas. EM1 Landscape says it is also important to be aware of the broader implications of gradual change through the cumulative effects of character.
Okay, can you sum up? You're out of time.
Yep. In this context, the Parish Council argues that the disadvantages of developing this parcel of agricultural land substantially and demonstrably outweighs any benefits of 4 more houses in this location. As such, the Parish Council requests this application is refused. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your contribution. Do we have any questions for the Parish Council representative? Councillor Phillimore.
It's just that, as I understand it, and it's not a political point, Paul, you live next door to the site. Did you not have to declare an interest in that fact?
So I'm not a ward councillor tonight. I'm parish council, representing the Parish Council. I live about 50 metres away, not next door to it. I didn't realise there was an implication. I live in a parish.
I think we need some legal advice on that.
Yeah, the councillor isn't making the decision. He's speaking as the chair of the Parish Council.
Just a bit confused, Chair, as Councillor Gaskell called it in.
Can I also state, I'm not a ward councillor for this ward.
It's duly noted you're acting in the capacity as chairman of Newman Parish Council and their representative at the meeting tonight. Do we have any more questions? Councillor Rettigan.
Is there a neighbourhood plan in existence, and when was it made?
Unfortunately, we don't have a neighbourhood plan. It's a very small parish. We've not got ourselves organised enough to do that sort of level of detail.
Chair, if I can just clarify as well, it's before the committee because of the number of objections, not because of a call-in by any councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Court.
Thank you, Chair. Can you clarify this single track road? Who does that belong to?
I don't know if I can clarify it. It was belonged by a company called Spacia, who were part of the rail track company. It was originally used for, well, I don't know what it was originally used for, but when I moved in 25 years ago, it was used as a maintenance access. They don't do any repair work though, so we're responsible for all the repair work, and all the residents put money in to keep it maintained.
Thank you very much.
Okay, no more questions. Thank you very much for your contribution. And do we have a Mr. Finn speaking in objection? If you'd like to approach the Speaker's chair. Welcome to Development Control Committee. When you're ready, if you press the button on the right, you have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. I look forward to sharing with you a flavour of some of the objections my neighbours and I have to the application, and I hope you will agree with the many people who have objected and rejected. I live in the house that shares a significant border directly to the east of the application site, and been part of the local community for the last 19 years. Thank you for taking the time to conduct a site visit last week to our beautiful and very rural corner of Basingstoke. I'm sure there are a few things you will have noticed on your visit. Firstly, this is the wrong location for development. The barracks, the area in which the application site is located, is accessed via a very narrow single track, unmade, privately owned lane. This lane is in part a public right-of-way. This is beneficial to the barracks community as it helps provide a very rural feel to the area. The increased levels of traffic, were this application to be approved, will create a conflict between vehicles and users of the public right-of-way. The rural feel of the barracks is created in part by the mix of residential buildings and open spaces. The application site is on one of these open spaces. Allowing the infill of open countryside between residential properties will remove this mix and destroy that rural and open feel. As I said, this is simply not an acceptable location for development. Secondly, this is not a good use of land. The application site is productive farmland that provides natural drainage for the area and helps prevent localised flooding. It is a biodiverse site that hosts the usual range of flora and fauna that you would expect to find in the open countryside, plus of course plenty of sheep, or at least they were until they were removed a few weeks ago. If the application were granted, this farmland will be lost to future generations forever. The application is simply not an acceptable use of land. Thirdly, the application has no support from the local community. None of the residents surrounding the application site support the proposed development. There were 22 individual objectors and nobody in favour. This included almost all of the 12 households that make up the barracks. Fourthly, the application would lead to the overdevelopment of the barracks. Until recently, the barracks was made up of 8 households. Around 5 years ago, planning was granted for a further 4 houses towards the end of the access lane. If the application were to be approved, this will bring the number of houses to 16, a 100% increase in dwellings in just 5 years. This is an unsustainable level of development that again risks destroying what has always been a close-knit rural community. Finally, the application would lead to a loss of amenity for neighbouring properties. Many of the current residents fear that if approved, the loss of amenity will destroy their lifestyles forever. Whatever their design, replacing farmland with houses will see a significant increase in noise coupled with a significant loss of property.
You've got 1 minute left.
There is no denying that if your house backs onto farmland, you have a greater level of privacy than if it backs onto your neighbours' houses. I hope you can see fit to reject this application. Whilst I appreciate you must judge this on the balance of benefit and harm, I hope you can agree with me and the many other objectors that the loss of valuable farmland, the overdevelopment and subsequent destruction of a rural community, and the loss of amenity to neighbouring households will create significant harm that far outweighs the benefit to Basingstoke's housing target that this application would bring. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Do we have any questions for Mr. Finn? Councillor Harold Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for giving us that information. You said you've been around for, I think, 19 years, so you must remember the previous application. Were many of those similar points made at that, in objection to that application as well?
My understanding is
If you could use the mic, then we'll pick up what you're saying.
My apologies, not used to this. Yes, I've been there 19 years. My understanding is the previous applications were prior to my time. I think they were in the 1980s.
So I should clarify, I meant for the neighbouring site.
for the neighbouring
Because
site.
that was 6 years ago, you said.
Yeah, sorry, the neighbouring, sorry, can you repeat the question, sorry?
So for the neighbouring site, were many of the same objections made at that point?
Yes, I think the key difference between this application and the previous application for the neighbouring site is that was on a brownfield site. So previously there was a small industrial unit there, and although there were objections to the houses, primarily that was around the number of houses that were previously going to put there. And with negotiations with the developer, it was reduced to a level where, to be perfectly honest, it was probably better having the houses there than the industrial units that were previously there.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Finn, for your contribution. So, do we have Mr. Taylor to speak in support? Welcome to Development Control Committee. When you're ready, if you press the button on your right, you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Tom, I've got it. Thank you. Good evening, members. This application seeks to establish the principle of 4 new homes. However, you will see from the illustrative site layout that we've submitted, and to confirm, the intention absolutely would be to provide 4 detached family homes. The PIP application deals with the principle initially, and your officers have obviously provided a very detailed report confirming that the principle is acceptable. However, the applicant has been keen to go a step further and provide reassurance regarding the design, the detailed design that we intend to submit for detailed measures. As shown on the layout plan, at this stage it's envisaged that it will be broadly a mirror image of the very successful development which it neighbours, which was built in the recent years. In this respect, the proposal would therefore be entirely in keeping with the established character and very sensitive to the area. This is considered to be a very sustainable location for a small-scale housing development that this is, being located within walking distance of nearby bus stops and the train station in Hook, all of which is reachable by pavements. And as members will be aware, Hook contains day-to-day and weekly shopping needs for the residents of this development. It's also worth pointing out that we did, as I showed you on site, those who attended the site visit would have seen there was an OS extract from 1967, and this site has been developed previously and was effectively the same as the site to the west at that time. Both actually contained a handful of buildings. Since then, obviously, those buildings have been removed. As you would have also seen during the panel visit, the site falls within a well-established residential area and forms a rather natural infill plot for a small-scale development. The site is exceptionally well enclosed and benefits from a mature tree-lined boundaries that would almost entirely prevent views within the wider landscape. There will be no loss of trees, and new tree planting is proposed to be provided as part of the comprehensive landscape scheme to come. Given the layout, even from the highway, the development would have very limited visual impacts. Plots 1 and 2 would be set back, well back behind trees, and plots 3 and 4 are over 50 metres away from the highway. Following letters received from the public, it should be noted that the applicant and I have personally visited all of the residents, or certainly tried to visit all of the residents that made comments, and I'm very pleased to say that those visits were very well received. I believe we're able to address many of the main issues with this application, and following that feedback, a key issue here has been the access road and the condition, and the applicant has offered to resurface that access road along with a handful of other benefits, which I know is very well received. We've engaged very closely with the Parish Council and Councillor Gaskill, and especially with the Chair, because obviously he lives along here, and having met the neighbouring residents, we subsequently were invited to attend the Parish Council meeting, as were indeed all of the residents. During that meeting, I'm very pleased to say that no objections were received, which I think Councillor Gaskell would confirm, and I believe that is testament to the fact that the merits of the proposal, really, and the local benefits that we've offered. The applicant has...
1 minute left.
Thank you. The applicant has this week shared an early draft of the technical details with the Parish Council for consultation and circulation to the community, and the planning officer has also been provided a copy in early consultation. The applicant's approach to design is highly sustainable, and we also intend technical details to include on-site renewable technologies. It is not served by gas, nor do we want it to be. We would look at air source heat pumps powered by solar PV panels here, and the intention is to future-proof these homes for future generations to come. Overall, I very much hope that members agree that this is a small-scale, sensitive and sustainable addition to the village, which will enable genuine community benefits that would not cause any material detriment to existing neighbouring amenity. As well as with the existing neighbouring development, these homes would have a high level of architecture complementing the character of the area. I would just finish on the point of the adjacent development. At that time, that did receive a lot of objection. It did have a sort of low-key commercial use going on there, but now that's widely lauded by residents, and many of those actually who raised comments on this application reside in those houses. But it's a very successful development.
You're out of time now.
Thank you.
Okay.
But if you have any questions, please do ask me.
Okay, any questions for the agent? Councillor Bound?
Wrong button. Yes, I'm just sort of intrigued as to why you've come forward with a PIP and not a full application.
In hindsight, we wouldn't have. The reason we went for a PIP application is because we knew at that time, which this was, well, the recommendation was made on this, and it was initially ready to go to panel over 4 months ago. We knew that there was a delay on panel before we submitted, and that there was a bit of a backlog. The intention was to establish the principle, then work with residents on the detail. In hindsight, obviously, we missed about 4 committees in a row, just waiting to get onto the agenda. And again, you know, lessons learned, we wouldn't have done that. We've purposely provided the extra above and beyond on terms of level of detail to everybody, just to reinforce what we actually intend to do. And yes, if we hadn't done a PIP application, we could have done that from the outset. But that was our reason. It was primarily in the interest of time to speed things up, establish the principle, then go for the 4 houses in detail, but we chose not to do that.
Councillor Rattigan?
Thanks. Just a follow-up to Councillor Bound. I mean, you've gone for a minimum of 1, a maximum of 4. I mean, couldn't you have changed the application and just say for 4 PIPs rather than just give us some nebulous number? Because you know we're looking at it, and our decision will be based on location, land use, scale, and all that. If we'd had a technical details consent in front of us, we would be able to judge those far better.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Acton. Absolutely. In truth, the planning officer hasn't offered. You know, it's well established that we were going for 4. The whole dialogue has always been that it will be 4-family housing. The planning officer didn't offer that we could change the description. I'm not aware whether the officer would have been comfortable with that anyway, because it would have been a change to the actual description of the proposed development. Nonetheless, we are obviously only looking at the principle here, and we have provided the illustrative layout and gone beyond that with the detail that it is going to be 4 houses, and we will come in obviously with those technical details for 4 houses, and the council will obviously have full ability to then look at those and consider those in detail. So yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from, but we're simply looking at the principle at this stage, and we absolutely will be coming in with technical details for you to consider subsequently for the 4.
Councillor Durrant?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Rattigan asked my question, so
Thank you. Have we got any more questions for the applicants? Okay, thanks very much for your contribution. Any questions for officers? Councillor Harold Sorrell?
I'm assuming we can't condition resurfacing of the road as part of this?
The PIP doesn't actually consider access. The reason the red line was extended as part of the application was that the TDC has to match the PIP, and the TDC does have to consider access. So that's why the red line was extended to include all of the access. It wasn't to consider whether the access was acceptable or not, because the PIP stage doesn't include any requirement to provide any ownership certificates, whereas with a planning application, you have to declare that you own all the land within the red line, or you've served notice on owners.
I only meant in context of the comment made by the applicant that they would offer to resurface the full length of the track, which obviously is a concern. One of the main concerns of residents is the track being in an unfit state for more traffic. So
we can't.
Could that be done at the TDC stage?
We can't condition PIPs. That's why the TDCs are all the information we want in TDCs is informatives. And because we don't know anything about ownership, we couldn't say that the applicant had to do something on land that we don't know if if because they don't have to provide any evidence at PIP stage. So there's no conditions, but it's certainly something that would be an issue at TDC to be considered.
Okay, Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, all we can look at it, Pip, is land use. That's the question I've got for officers. Now, the previous 4 houses were built, as we understand, as been said this evening, on a brownfield site. Now, that's a lot easier when you have something like a PIP, because the encouragement is, in this day and age, that we use brownfield sites prior to greenfield sites. On page 107 in the report, on the second paragraph, it states that there's 0.64 hectares of grade 3 good to moderate agricultural land that is determined through the Natural England assessment. Now, and it also goes on in that paragraph to say there is other agricultural land around, so there's no significant loss with the 0.64 hectares. You could say that about any 0.64 hectares once you get outside the actual town of Basingstoke or the other larger residential areas, because there's plenty of land around the borough. But in this particular case, this, as was described by the chairman of the parish council, is a significant plot of land within a small village containment, settlement. And this is subjective, and I asked the officers who made that subjective decision that there's a significant amount of other green area, because most of the land that I've seen that come through this particular committee over many years has been sort of grade 1 down at the lower level, not grade 3 good to moderate. And I consider that a significant challenge to the recommendation for approval for this PIP. But I would like to hear the officers' view of that, please.
Thank you, Chair. The consideration around the page 107, loss of agricultural land, is just that is the matter, the material consideration that is being reviewed as required by the National Planning Policy Framework there. So the consideration is whether there is a significant development of agricultural land, and the officer assessment is that the development itself is 0.64 hectares, and in the wider area there's obviously a much greater amount of agricultural land, and that this development therefore of 0.64 hectares is minor in scale in comparison to the national policy preference for significant developments of agricultural land to be safeguarded. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'll reserve any more comments in debate.
Thank you. Councillor Bound.
Thanks, Chair. If we granted this PIP, it is for between 1 and 4 houses. Were the applicant, notwithstanding what he said this evening, to come forward and build 1 house, would that be considered suitable use, land use? And secondly, if they built the 1 house, could they still, at a much later date, come forward with the 3 other houses to be built? Or once the one has been built, and they got technical details consent on that one, does that then override the PIP?
Well, the technical detail consent has to match the red line of the PIP. So I actually don't know if you could put 4 in with the same line and each have a separate bit that was available, to be converted at some stage. But yes, they could come in with 1 application and 1 dwelling, but then that 1 dwelling would then be a material consideration for any 2, 3 or 4 dwelling that came in the future, because it would be an existing dwelling. Also the time limit between getting your TDC in, because with an outline you can put as many reserved matters in as you like coming through on those. So I don't know whether a PIP's the same and a TDC, but the red line can't change. So, but if the 1 house was built, it would then be a material consideration that houses 2, 3 and 4 would have to consider in terms of access, overlooking, garden space, parking, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, I just want a bit of clarity on that. If the one was built and they got technical details consent for one, but not for the other three, under the terms of the PIP, could those three still be built at some future date, is what I'm asking.
There's a time limit to submit your TDC after your PIP is approved. So if you don't do it in time, then it falls away. But you couldn't just build the houses. They would have to have they'd have to have permission, because a PIP isn't a planning permission. You can't build anything with a PIP. It's only half the planning permission. You need the TDC on top of it, because the TDC is what comes forward with the ownership, the access, all of the details. But no, you couldn't build houses 2 and 3 and 4 if you didn't have more permission, whether that be a TDC or a full in the future or something else like that. You can't build anything from a PIP.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you. The agent alluded to the fact that they couldn't change the proposal title to the PIP being 4. Is that correct? I have no idea that that would be correct or not.
I mean, they could have changed it to full.
No, to 4, not 1 to 4, but 4 on a PIP. Could they not have changed it says on it, permission in principle for the erection of minimum 1 and the maximum of 4. Could they not just said permission in principle for 4 dwellings?
The requirement under a PIP is to say the minimum and the maximum, but they could have said a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 4. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. The question's been answered.
Thank you. Councillor Phillimore.
I think the question that I was going to ask is probably going to be in debate, Chair.
Okay, and Councillor Howard Sorrell.
I think I just wanted to try and get some clarity around Councillor Bound's point. Because I think what he was asking was, if this PIP gets approved and then they come forward with TDC for a single dwelling, does that then, he said the word override, but maybe that's not explaining it very well. Does that remove the PIP from consideration? Could they then come back in 5 years' time? Because I know PIPs don't last indefinitely, but does the application of the TDC extends the PIP timeline? So could they come back with one TDC, say in 2026, and then that would reset the clock on the PIP expiring, and then come back another 3 years later, and so on, and stretch it out over many years? I don't know why they would, but that seems to be the question Councillor Bound was asking, so I just want clarity on that.
And just opening the guideline, the government's advice here, and it is...
Is it not the case that if they come in with technical details consent on the whole application site for one dwelling, and then they implement that, then the whole of the... For one house, yeah, and the rest would be spent, so you wouldn't get another 3 dwellings.
Okay, no more questions. We'll move on to debate then. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I know it's a bit of an odd one. We're going to start with the access. We drove 4 cars down there. We parked 4 cars off the site with no problems whatsoever. But that's irrelevant because, as we heard earlier, access is not a consideration on a PIP. As the same, neither is the ownership of that lane. The location is a consideration on a PIP. It's in a little hamlet, a little cluster of houses. It's not stuck out in the middle of nowhere. It's not isolated. Scale of the development, it's not an overdevelopment. It's actually a very spacious development. So there's no way it could be refused on overdevelopment. And the use of the agricultural issue, you look around that area, not in the, don't look 100 yards around, you look a mile around, that area is surrounded by fields. I can see absolutely no reason to refuse a PIP on this, and I move the officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. When we have things in front of us and there is no neighbourhood plan, we have to think, I think, a little bit deeper. We have to be the protectors of some parishes when they don't have a neighbourhood plan, or in some cases they haven't made the effort themselves, or sometimes they haven't got the capability or ability to bring forward a neighbourhood plan. So what we're looking at tonight is the location, the land use and the scale. I didn't go on the site viewing, but I have taken the time to look on Google Maps and to realise where the site is and what it is. I have to be really honest with you. The location, the land use, which obviously is different from its current agricultural use, fills me with a little bit of dread. And I can see this would be an urbanisation of the green field that it sits in. And I can't concur with Councillor Robinson on this. So on the three issues of location, land use and scale, I think it is unacceptable to me as an individual. Thank you.
Councillor Miller.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Rattigan. Yes, I will echo some of your concerns. I come back to my observation of this green field with good to moderate agricultural identification in this context of this small village. And one thing that also concerns me is we had a discussion in this council not so long back about biodiversity. It was in this chamber. Now, the problem is that we have the dichotomy of planning and the use of land. Now, we can't just stop planning and building houses, but the right use of the brownfield site on the mirror of this proposal was the right thing to do. But in this particular case, you've got a green field which is in use for agricultural use, and quite frankly, my view is it should be retained for that in this small community. This is a gradual encroachment. It's been mentioned this evening that it's a residential area now. Well, it wasn't X years ago, and this is another one of these creeps, of planning creep that we have, of somebody gets the brownfield site, puts some houses on it, quite rightly, because that's a good use of it, and then starts to creep across into the useful agricultural area. And I'm on that point of the land use, I'm afraid I cannot agree with the officer's recommendation. Thank you very much.
Councillor Howell-Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. I think I speak for all councillors when I say we really enjoy PIPs. They're a really useful tool for developers to get their way, which is really all we're here for, to facilitate developers. That being said, I agree with Councillor Robinson. I don't think there's any substantial reason that we can refuse this on. I'm not particularly happy about it, but I will happily second his motion.
Okay, so we have a mover and seconder. I will invite Councillor Bound to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Howell-Sorrell and Councillor Robinson. I mean, if it had been, I'm still not very happy if it were to come forward with one house. I think it would be a gross underuse of that area of land. So I think the four that were spoken of by the developer would be more to my sort of inclination in terms of what would suitably fit on the site. I think the problem, as far as I'm concerned, is that, as Councillor Robinson said, we could park quite conveniently where we parked. We could get to it from the main road quite conveniently, but more to the point, the development next door seemed to me to have, along with the houses on the eastern side, and I agree that it's just an infill but it's just a slightly more developed area, and we need the houses in the borough. And because of that, I shall be voting in the way of the officer recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Hussey?
Chair, looking at the location plan, the former brownfield site to the west of the application site, it looks like an island development. This is better than an infill in that it makes the hamlet more of a whole unit. And I'm just adding that comment to the comments made by Councillor Robinson, so I'm fully in favour. I think it's an enhancement rather than anything else. Thank you.
Councillor Phillimore?
Well, I'm totally against this. I'm in support of Councillor Rattigan and Councillor Miller. When is a greenfield site not a greenfield site? I'm really unhappy with this flooding situation, because only at TDC has the assessment got to be made. Now, if that's made in a negative manner, how can we prove that tonight? I mean, I feel uncomfortable with that. I feel very uncomfortable with the biodiversity issues as supporting what Councillor Miller had said.
Councillor Faulkner?
Yeah, the joy of PIPs has already been mentioned, and I've had some bitter and bloody experience. When you cut through it all, I think if we refuse this, I think we would lose an appeal. I have no doubt we would lose an appeal. So whether we like it or not, I think we have to accept that reality on a PIP.
Thank you. Well, we've got a proposal on the table, moved and seconded, so I'm going to move to vote now. Those in favour of the officer recommendation, please show. Yep, 6. Okay. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
6-5, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to confirm, that is approved in accordance with the officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And moving on, item 3, land at Berry Court Farm, Little London. If we can have the officer introduced, please.
Thank you, Chair. Item 3 seeks to vary a range of conditions imposed on a previous technical details consent for 4 dwellings at Berry Court Farm, Silchester Road in London. The effect of the proposed variation to the wording of conditions would allow for the development to be implemented in a phased manner, with the intention for them to come forward as self-built dwellings. The proposed changes to the wording would require the submission of details for each plot before works commence on each plot, rather than the development as a whole. In addition, the application is accompanied by proposed surface water and fountain water drainage details and access construction details, and these have been submitted to satisfy conditions 12, 13 and 21 of the technical details consent. These conditions secured the submission of further details for consideration, and it's therefore proposed to amend the wording of those conditions to ensure compliance with the details provided. The site location and the development itself remain as granted by the previous technical details consent. By way of update, the Council's drainage engineer has provided comments to confirm that the submitted drainage strategy is acceptable. And to provide some additional background to members, officers have also included some further commentary and explanation on the process of self-build exemption for still purposes in the update paper. Lastly, it is advised that condition 1 in the main agenda referred to the wrong application reference, and it's therefore recommended that this is amended as set out on the update paper. The application is recommended for approval as set out in the agenda and subject to the conditions listed.
Thank you very much. I don't see anyone listed down to speak in objection, but we do have Karen Tipper in support. Hello again. So when you're ready, you've got 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. The Planning Officer's report to committee is very clear on the history of the site and the legislative reasons for this application. I don't propose to repeat these points, but I do wish to provide you with some context. The application is twofold. Firstly, to allow sill phasing. Secondly, to take the opportunity to provide technical information to the council, which is required to discharge the conditions attached to the previous technical detail consent, effectively using this application to satisfy the pre-commencement conditions applied to the TDC. In respect of sill, it has been the applicant's intention from the very start to seek self-build exemption, and this is evidenced through the technical detail consent application and also the subsequent appeal. To be clear, self-build exemption remains open to the applicant on the site as a whole, irrespective of this application this evening. What the applicant is seeking is the phasing of the development to allow each of the new homes to come forward independently. In the absence of phasing, any subsequent variation to the permission or non-compliance would mean that each owner of the 4 houses would be jointly and severally liable for sill. If self-build is not sought or not granted by the council, then sill monies would remain payable to the council. Legislation and planning guidance is very clear that there is nothing to prevent or limit development being delivered as independent self-build plots. Self-build interest has already been expressed locally by parties who are ready to commence development as soon as the sill process has been completed. This then leads me quite nicely onto the second part of the application, which is the provision of the technical information to satisfy the pre-commencement conditions regarding the foul and surface water drainage and also the vehicle access requirements. The applicant has submitted this now so that the additional discharge of condition process can be avoided. The grant of this Section 73 application this evening would allow for the development to be implemented immediately following the self-build exemption request being completed. Each dwelling would need to comply fully with all of the conditions that are listed on the report and the update sheet. The application does not propose to vary the development as approved. The principle, the design and access are all agreed. There is no material planning grounds in our view that a different conclusion should come to this evening, other than that set out in the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Yes, Councillor Bound.
Hello. Again. Third paragraph down on page 125 of the officer report says this. This was, however, not taken into consideration by the LPA or the planning inspector in determining the application. I think you have just said that it was always the intention of the applicant that these should be brought forward as self-builds. And I thought you said that that the local planning authority and the inspector knew that.
So on the technical detail consent application, the applicant submitted SIL Form 1. And within SIL Form 1, they ticked the box that said that they intended to apply for self-build. Within the appeal, all of that information was submitted to the inspector as well and considered. The point that was being made is that the development description wasn't considered as a phasing for SIL purposes. It was considered for 4 houses. The purpose of this application is to phase that so that it can still come forward as self-build as entirely envisaged, but it allows each plot to come forward individually.
Okay, being no other questions, thank you very much for your contribution. So, do we have any questions for officers? Councillor Bound again.
So back to the officers then. So the technical details consent was for 4 self-built houses, but just not phased.
The description in the technical details consent was just for 4 dwellings. They didn't specify that they would be self-built. It was just within the accompanying SIL form that had to be submitted that indicated that that the intention was there that they would apply for self-build exemption, which you can do on any application for new housing, whether it be a full or a technical details consent.
Okay, so I think it's worth adding at this point on page 8 of the update paper, it is noted that in principle 5.1 of the housing SPD that states that where development is acceptable in all other respects, the delivery of self-build and custom homes, including plots for such homes, will be supported. So the question is self-build, but you can't object to it in terms of its self-build. Do I have any more questions, Councillor Rattigan?
Thank you. Just a question for the officers. They have a self-build 4 houses here. Can they at any stage go back to saying, actually, we'll have it built by a builder and we'll pay the SIL? Is that possible? Because self-build can be expensive.
Yes, so upon the granting of the technical details consent, if that is what happens tonight, then the individuals would have to apply to the council for self-build exemption. Through that process, that would either be agreed or not agreed. If it's agreed, then they'd be exempt from paying any SIL payments. If not, then it would be chargeable on that specific plot. Likewise, they could then, one of the plots, for example, an application could not be made on a specific plot if the interest isn't there and the landowner isn't able to sell it to a self-builder.
How would we'll condition once the self-builder comes forward on things like bricks and tiles and things like that? So you'll get a second application for all of the conditions that you've put within this?
So under the previous technical details consent, all of the conditions, for example, materials, soft landscaping, that sort of thing, we would have expected to see site-wide. So what materials would be for all of the 4 properties. The way that the proposed phasing would work and how the conditions have been reworded is that would enable them to submit it for each plot individually. So rather than 1 application for materials, we could have 4.
Councillor Miller, you had your hand up?
Yes, I did, Chair, thank you. I noticed that this applications come before this committee because of the number of objections. But it sounds like if they didn't have the objections, this is a paper exercise to be executed by the local planning authority. Am I right?
I think it's also worth noting that a lot of the representations that were received raised matters which are outside of the scope or perhaps misunderstood the intention of this application. For example, some of the representations thought that the application was to remove the conditions. So whilst an objection has been received, it doesn't directly relate to what is actually being proposed. There is no policy which restricts this exact thing from happening. So in answer to your question, yes, it is essentially a paper exercise, but the application had to be put to us for them to construct the development in a phased manner.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Excellent, because I'm just going on to the debate. So do we have a seconder? Councillor Doran? Okay, I take it it's an application extremely limited in scope, so we'll move to vote. Those in favour, please show. That's carried. So if we could have the decision.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm that that is approved in accordance with the officer recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Right, moving on. Item number 4, 309 Kempshot Lane. If we could have the officer presenting.
Thank you, Chair. This is a variation of condition application seeking to vary condition 1 of planning permission BDB 56185, and that is to allow the surgery to conduct other dental procedures and facial aesthetics and to align with the current use class groups, specifically use class E. There is no update for this application.
Okay, and I understand we've got Dr. and Mr. Richardson supporting. Is that right? If you could come forward. Welcome to Development Control Committee. When you're ready, press the button on your right and you'll have 4 minutes.
Good evening, and thank you for giving us this opportunity to speak at the meeting tonight. My name is Dr. Beth Richardson. I'm here tonight with my husband Bertie, and we run and own Basingstoke Orthodontics. I'm a specialist orthodontist, have been a dentist for 25 years, and I've dedicated my clinical practice to orthodontics for the past 13 years. We took over Basingstoke Orthodontics in Kempshott Lane 8 years ago from a retiring colleague, and since then have continued to deliver both NHS and private orthodontic care to the families of Basingstoke and the surrounding area. We submitted this application to remove the orthodontics only clause from our planning status in order to enable us to deliver a more comprehensive service to our patients. Since Dr. Roland Smith opened the practice in 1997, orthodontics has grown to be more than just metal braces. Our work addresses a much wider remit, including managing children and adults with complex oral health issues, sleep and breathing disorders, and problems with bite and facial pain. Many of these issues require adjunctive treatments, such as the use of Botox and dermal filler. Under our current planning status, we're not able to offer the comprehensive care we would like to deliver to our patients. Botox and dermal filler are used as an adjunct to orthodontics in many ways, which go well beyond wrinkle reduction. Muscle relaxant injections are used for patients with gummy smiles, facial pain, and jaw joint issues. And they can be used as a standalone treatment or in combination with brace treatment. And by being able to offer all of these treatments, I'll be able to provide my patients with a more comprehensive level of care. But looking beyond the orthodontic service we currently offer, we would like to be in a position to be able to address the shortfall in dental provision to the children of Basingstoke by offering a specialist children's dental service, including access to an oral surgeon for removal of decayed teeth. The most recent survey of children's dental health showed that 11% of 3-year-olds in the UK have visible signs of tooth decay, with an average of 3 teeth affected. 24% of 5-year-olds in England have visible tooth decay. Tooth decay is a completely preventable disease with correct education and access to dental health professionals. In North Hampshire, the waiting time for a child to be seen in the community dental service is currently 5 years. And for removal of rotten teeth under general anaesthesia, the waiting time is over 12 months. There are very few dental practices in Basingstoke accepting children for routine dental care, and many children are expected to travel to Reading, Portsmouth or Southampton to see a dentist. Anecdotally, today I had a 4-year-old in my surgery who has never seen a dentist because they can't register with one. 4 years old.
1 minute left.
In terms of specialist paediatric dental practices, the closest to Basingstoke is a practice in Twickenham. We understand the frustration of our neighbours regarding parking around the practice. I have been in contact several times with Basingstoke and Hampshire Highways departments. They are aware of the issues, and Hampshire Council will be visiting the practice to see if any parking restrictions could be implemented to ease the situation. However, we are not a priority. This change of use will not increase the volume of patients visiting the practice or the number of staff. We have 3 surgeries, and we don't have space for any more operating rooms. At any one time, there can only be 1 patient, 1 dentist, 1 dental nurse, and a guardian in each surgery, regardless of the procedure being performed. I thank you all for your time and consideration of our case.
Great, thank you very much for your contribution. And Councillor Miller, you have a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, good evening, Doctor. everything you said about dentistry in general resonates, I think, with all of us in the room. Let's go back to parking. You've got 6 parking spaces according to the block plan in our paperwork tonight. I have to ask you, because most of the objections in the report are about parking, 6 spaces, what's on average, and I know the problem is you get 3 surgeries occupied, I presume that's 3 cars possibly. You can correct me on any of this. And then for the next changeover, there should be 6 spaces should satisfy the changeover between the various operating procedures. If that's the case, you shouldn't have any of your patients parking on the roads, on the pavements, as is alluded by the objectors. Could you explain how the parking system works, please?
You're absolutely right, Councillor, that we do have 6 parking spaces. We try to limit the number of staff that are parking off-site, on-site and off-site by using 1 or 2 of those parking spaces for staff. We do encourage staff also to use local transport. I myself come from Surrey, but I come on public transport and bicycles. We have a bicycle rack in the back of the practice as well to try and encourage people to use public transport or using bicycle or walking. But most of our patients are teenagers. They're often coming from school, delivered by the parent, and will often stop curbside. And we can't stop them from doing that. We have put up signage. We send out an email. At the bottom of every email we send out, there is a paragraph asking people not to park outside the practice, on the road, opposite the junction, in Gracemere Crescent. It goes with every single communication that we have. But because there is no parking enforcement, as in yellow lines, I can't stop them from doing it. It's an endless battle. We've had neighbours coming in and shouting at me in the reception of the practice. I can't do any more. I've contacted Highways because there's not been an accident. We're not a priority for them to come out. And I actually would like them to put yellow lines around the junction and people to park in the car park, because it would make my life easier, because then I wouldn't have to deal with angry neighbours. But I can't stand out on the road all day, every day, telling people not to park opposite a junction. They've all got driving licences, they all passed their test. I can't do any more.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, there be no more questions. Thank you very much for your contribution. Questions for officers? I don't see any hands up. Right, debate. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. It's quite clear from this there's no increase in throughput and therefore no increase in traffic. It's just a change of the type of treatments they offer, so I move the officer recommendation.
Thank you. Councillors Harold Sorrell?
I will second the officer's recommendation. I recognise that this has probably just been a cathartic complaining exercise for a lot of residents that have submitted objections. There's no obviously realistic prospect that we're going to refuse this, and even if we did, it wouldn't affect the parking situation anyway, so I imagine it's just allowed them to voice their... Anyway.
Councillor Faulkner?
Very quickly, Chair, I'm just flabbergasted that we've been asked to make a decision. I wouldn't know orthodontic treatment from any other, if I was having Botox, I still wouldn't know the difference. I go along with what's already been said.
Okay, well, hopefully we've got the information in front of us tonight to make a decision. I'm going to move to vote, though. Those in favour, please show. And that's carried.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm that is approved in accordance with the officer recommendation.
Okay, that brings us on to item number 5, which is 8 Webbs Farm Close, Whitchurch. If we could have the officer introduce the item, please.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Andy, can I have a ruling? I've called it in, so can I partake? I'm not registered to speak. Yeah.
You can speak.
This is an application at 8 Webbs Farm Close, Whitchurch. It is a householder application for the erection of a 2-storey front and side extension over the existing garage to provide work from home studies and replacement bedroom, together with aesthetic improvements. There is an update on page 9 of the update paper, reporting that members visited the site on the 4th of August and observed the relationship from the proposed development with neighbouring properties. Just to say that the recommendation is delegate to officers to refuse due to an unexpired consultation period, and the update gives you the dates of those consultation periods. Also, an amended block plan has been received that matches the proposed floor plans and roof plans and elevations. There was an error on the block plan, so that has been received as well.
Okay, so don't have any objections. Log to speak. Have we got Mr. Brettel, Mr. Boruth to speak in support, if you'd like to come forward?
I've been here before. I'm deaf, by the way, so my client is here to field any questions that you have.
Okay, welcome to Development Control. If you press the right-hand button to speak, and then you'll have 4 minutes.
Thank you for having us. As you're aware, the application is currently recommended for refusal based on an overbearing impact on the neighbour. We are here to contest the notion that the proposal is overbearing. It's our contention in the first instance that the distance from the neighbouring property should be measured from the existing line, the existing dwelling line of the rear boundary, the rear elevation, to the side of the garage. That would be 10 metres. We don't feel that the side of the garage should be measured to the conservatory. Any part of a house that could be expended under permitted development, I don't feel should impact on the ability of my applicant to improve their own property. In Whitchurch, we have numerous examples of two-storey gable elevations where they are within 10 metres or closer than 10 metres, as we are here. The proposal, thank you, the elevation was just there, is for a storey and a half height extension, not a full gable. I could list off numerous situations in Whitchurch within 1 square mile of the application site. Parkview, you have a two-storey gable within 9.2 metres of the rear of a neighbour. That diminishes to 5.75 metres with a single-storey outrigger. Existing situation, not overbearing. Received planning permission. Cowslip Drive in Whitchurch, 7.85 metres, two-storey gable to the rear of a neighbour. Marsden Court, 9 metres, rear elevation to a two-storey side gable. There's no clear definition of overbearing, and there's no specific distances that we should work to. The published document that Basingstoke and Dean have refers simply back to the planning portal definition. The word overbearing, therefore, is subjective and must be related to context. This specific context, we have to say that the owner of number 6, Web's Farm Close, has been notified and consulted on 2 planning applications and has not objected. So the very property that we're being told is going to receive an overbearing impact has not objected. They're fine with it. In addition, within a mile of this property at Groves Orchard, we have a two-storey gable, 8 metres in height, 8.4 metres in height, that is 10 metres away from a neighbouring property, rear elevation, who themselves have built a conservatory that's much bigger than the conservatory here. And they've also built a big flat roof dormer extension on the top, further encroaching the garden space. That's an existing precedent. That situation has happened. It's there. It's right there, a mile away from the site. If that's the existing precedent that we're dealing with, surely that's the context we have to work with. When there is a clear precedent, it's the most obvious reason for an appeal, particularly in an absence of specific guidance and where there's a subjective word that is the cause for a refusal. We don't feel that by raising the height of that elevation by a couple of metres for a barn hip will be overbearing on the neighbour. Thank you.
1 minute. Oh. Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much for your contribution. Do we have any questions for officers? Councillor Phillimore?
I might roll them all into one, but are there any objections from consultees, including Whitchurch Town Council?
No, the responses to the application are on page 163, and which Church Town Council raises no objection to this planning application, provided that the officer's advice is adhered to.
Is it correct that there's only one comment from biodiversity which recommends a bat roost or a bird nesting box?
That is correct, as it's reported on the printed papers.
The officer's report mentioned an overbearing impact on the neighbours, but they haven't objected. Is that true?
That is correct.
Okay, I'm going to move on now because you've had 3 questions. Councillor Faulkner.
Yeah, just to clarify this issue about proximity, are there any guidelines regarding whether a conservatory which has been built onto the original property, whether the line is taken from the conservatory or from the original house?
There isn't a specific guideline, it's each on their own merits, but if I draw your attention to page 165 in the printed papers, the officer has considered the 6-metre distance from the conservatory extension and the 10-metre distance from the original back of the dwelling, so they have considered both situations. And on the second to bottom paragraph, the officer has considered the use of the amenity space as well, with 6 Webbs Farm Close includes a patio area immediately adjacent to the existing garage, and the first floor extension would dominate this area, appearing overbearing. So it's not just the distance from the back of the conservatory that the officers considered. They've considered the conservatory distance, the original dwelling distance, and then the use of the amenity space.
If I could just add to that as well, Chair. We're considering the impact of the proposed development on the existing situation. And the existing situation is that property does benefit from a conservatory.
Okay, I don't see any more questions, so we'll move to debate. Councillor Miller.
I think this, thank you, Chairman. I think this is a good example of the use of the viewing panel, because if we'd sat down and looked at these papers, we wouldn't have gotten what I term a real appreciation of what the situation is on the ground. And standing in the road and looking at the collection of houses in the context of the street scene, certainly from my perspective, I won't speak for anybody else, but it was obvious. If you just visualize what was going to happen, you know, we have the diagrams in front of us, it was, and I would use it, certainly in my experience, as certainly creating an overbearing picture within the street scene. It really was a sort of one step too far. There would probably be another form of extension proposed on that wouldn't be. You know, there are all kinds of ways you can extend a property, but as proposed, we do not, and as was mentioned by officers, we treat everything on its merit. We don't take precedence too much into consideration, and certainly in the household world, we look at each case in its context. And as far as I'm concerned, the context here was, I fully support the officer's recommendation, given what we've got in front of us.
Are you therefore happy to move?
I'm happy to move, support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Councillor Miller's really said 90% of what I was going to say. We must take everyone in context, and the context of this is if I walked out of the back of that conservatory of the neighbour, which is there, and we can't say, well, what if it wasn't there? It is there. You would walk out and you would look up and you would see a massive expanse of brickwork, and that it would be overbearing. So I second Councillor Miller's proposal.
Councillor Harold Sorrell, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to say that we haven't received many objections, or any objections, I don't think. And the existing neighbour might not have issues with it, but we're also having to make decisions based on potential impact on future occupiers of the properties in question. So whilst I have sympathies that there are no objections and the applicant might feel that they therefore should have it approved, it's the wider context and it's the future context as well. So I agree with what the others have said.
Okay, I think we'd better move to vote. It's been moved and seconded. in favour of the recommendation. Those in favour, please show. Against? Oh, abstentions 1. If we have the decision.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, that is refused, subject to the expiry of the publicity period and no new material planning considerations. Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us on to our final item, item 6, 97 Derwent Road in Kempshott. If we could have someone move that, please, from the officers.
Thank you, Chair. Item 6 seeks planning permission for the erection of a single-storey front extension, replacement of an existing rear flat roof with a pitched roof, and a proposed pitched roof canopy over a side door at 97 Derwent Road, Basingstoke. The proposed development is identical to that previously approved in 2020, but that permission has now expired and the applicant is just seeking to renew that permission. The application is before the Development Control Committee tonight, as the applicant is related to a member of council staff. The application is recommended for approval, subject to the list of conditions on page 178 of the agenda. There is no update.
Okay, we have no one down to speak. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, we'll move straight. Oh, Councillor Miller.
Not a question, Chair. I'd like to propose and move this for approval.
Excellent, thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Robinson. Those in favour, please show. Okay, that's carried. So the decision.
Thank you, Chair. Confirm that's approved in accordance with the officer recommendation. Thank you.
So there being no other items, thank you for your attendance. I declare this meeting closed. Time is 8 minutes past 8.